So thank you, local champions, for joining us this evening on our session, communicating about climate change. And so our special guest here tonight is Tim Guinee. Is it Guinea or Guinea?
It's Guinea, like guinea pig.
Guinea, Tim Guinee, who is a Marbletown resident and actor. And Tim has given innumerable talks in the Hudson Valley and beyond as a leader of the Climate Reality Project, which was founded by Vice President Al Gore. And it does a lot of trainings to help a diverse group of individuals who are seeking to catalyze global solutions to the climate crisis, supporting urgent action across every level of society. And so Tim, I know, gives just hundreds of these talks and to a lot of different people, which is really interesting, including conservative fire departments, the Houston oil industry executives, as well as maximum security inmates. And he's also involved locally with Riverkeeper, the Ashokan Center, and some other really wonderful projects here in the area. So we're really lucky to have him tonight. He's going to do a presentation for us and tell us a little bit about some other opportunities for projects that you might want to look into and get involved in. And then we're going to put each other kind of in the hot seat and try out our own communication skills and do like a little actors workshop, as it were. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Tim.
So I'm doing something very different than what I normally do. I normally give these kind of presentations on the climate crisis, and I know a little about what you guys are doing, which is fantastic and heroic and possibly a little scary in some ways, to get out in front of people and talk about all of this stuff. I have a belief, the thing when Americans are polled that they're most afraid of, more than cancer and getting AIDS and COVID, is public speaking. It terrifies people. And I have a real belief, particularly when I speak to oppositional audiences, that just by standing up to talk, I'm actually doing the hardest part of the whole thing. Because I think that there's a level at which that says to people, I care enough to be uncomfortable. I care enough about this. So to me, that's the biggest thing, is to say, hi, I'm Tim, and I want to talk to you about the climate crisis. So I'm going to, I have to move this to share the screen. I'm going to try a couple of weird screen sharing things, and we'll see how well they work or don't. So I'm with this group called the Climate Reality Project, which was started by, oops, no, that didn't work, which was started by former Vice President Gore in 2005. And now I have participants. Oh boy. Okay, there we go. And now that's not good. All right. Sorry, guys. Okay, I'm going to try. Are you still seeing my screen?
No.
Okay. So
now we're seeing your whole desktop.
Yep. And now we should be good. Okay. So as was said, I've given these kind of talks all over the place to all kinds of different audiences. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some specific things that come up that get thrown at me fairly often, but I'm going to talk a lot about how I go about talking with people. This was actually the Accord Firehouse. And I'll just throw out there, and you guys interrupt me, do whatever you want. This is your time and your meeting. Anybody know why I'm dressed like a fireman? Well, I am a fireman, but anybody know why I dressed like that? to go to this thing.
To show it's not like an outsider.
Yeah, I think there's a whole thing, if you can figure out who your audience is, about being relatable, about being someone they trust. So that was that. So anyhow, this particular one, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of kind of myths a little bit. This particular one, it was 17 degrees below zero, and firehouses aren't particularly well heated. And when I stood up, one of the guys yelled, "You want to talk about fucking global warming? I'm freezing my ass off." So one of the things that can happen with it, particularly right now, is people will say, "Come on, there's an ice storm. You're talking about climate change." So I just really quickly wanted to talk a little about why we're seeing what we're seeing across the country and how that is actually part of climate change. So the jet stream is formed because warm, humid air, moisture rises up off of the equator, it evaporates, and it moves poleward, north and south, and it runs into very cold, dry air. And that the intersection of that dry air and that very humid air causes the jet stream. The polar regions are actually warming up about 3 times as fast as the equator. And so that hot, warm air isn't meeting air that's as cold. And because of that, what we're now seeing in the jet stream is that it's undulating a lot. And this is causing some very weird things to happen. For example, Hurricane Harvey, when it barreled into Houston, it just did this weird thing where it suddenly sat above Houston. And the thought is that, we now have these sort of troughs and valleys in the jet stream, that it got caught in one of those valleys and it just sat there. So in most of the Houston area, the 5-day rain total was a 1 in 25,000 year event. In some places, it was a 1 in 500,000 year event. And that's because this jet stream is destabilized. So normally, the polar vortex sort of stays exactly where it is when you have a strong jet stream. When it begins fluctuating, which is what's now happening, that cold air, that polar vortex can move. So this is what, things look like in a good, stable condition. This is 2018. The polar vortex actually split into 2. And that cold air dropped down into Europe and North America. Here's 2017, sort of normal. And then again, 2018, you can see it split into 2, dropping that cold, cold weather down, down, down. So this is, what's going on in Texas right now, but it's part of the climate crisis. So Jane Goodall, who I normally think of as being kind of placid and calm, says this about climate change deniers: "I want to see them go to the Antarctic where the sea ice is melting faster than ever before and dump them in the middle of it." They could be a little frustrating when you're trying to talk to them about this stuff. And there are people who, no matter what, aren't going to believe what's right before their eyes. These are sunbathers in Finland with reindeer. This is a woman cleaning the inside window of a pub in the middle of a huge flood in England. Here's some guys in Venice enjoying a lunch during a flood. And, of course, people just going on like normal in the middle of terrible fires. And, you hear these crazy things. Marjorie Taylor Greene, you guys probably have heard that the fires out west were started by lasers from outer space. But here's the good news that I want to tell you. If you're nervous about some of these conversations that you're having, we tend to, in the climate community, think that there are just, the people who get the science and the denialists. And to a degree, that's true. But Yale has done a thing where they've sort of graded that. And they see it as there being 6 Americas: the alarmed, the concerned, the cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. The alarmed are the people who are most active about the climate crisis. They get that it's real. They believe in policy. They think it's imminent, and they'll work at it. The concerned think the human-caused global warming is happening, and it's serious, but they tend to think that it's kind of something coming down the road. So they probably support policy decisions, but it's maybe a third or fourth tier concern to them. The cautious haven't made up their mind. They don't know if global warming is real, and if it is, whether it's human caused and whether it's serious or not. The disengaged know very little about global warming, and they rarely hear about it on the media, if at all. And there are a fair number of people in this category who, especially when I'm speaking in prisons, there are folks who've never heard of the climate crisis. And that's a really interesting group of people. Then you've got the doubtful. They don't think that climate change is real. And if it is, it's naturally caused. It's nothing to worry about. They very rarely will even give it the time of day. And then you have the dismissive, who don't believe that global warming is happening or that it's human caused. And it's not a threat. And they are the ones who will say it's laser beams from outer space. It's a hoax. They're big into conspiracy theories. So here's the good news. So 5 years ago, the alarmed, the people who are the most active about the climate crisis, and the dismissive were each at about 12% of the population. However, in the last couple of years, the alarmed has grown from 12% to 26%, and the dismissive has contracted from 12% to 7%. So things are really growing in a good direction. So that dismissive voice now is only about 7% of the American population. So if you have to go in and talk about this stuff, it's going to be a small group of folks. They can be loud though, but numerically, they're a small group of folks. Now, and by the way, I should plug this. There's an absolutely extraordinary tool called the Yale Climate Opinion Survey. And the Yale Climate Opinion Survey breaks down by state, by the entire United States, then by state, then by county, and I believe by legislative district. And it has a whole list of things that will tell you about the opinions about the climate crisis in those areas. And you know, New York, 72% of New Yorkers think that climate change is happening, which is fantastic. So many times if I go in to give a climate talk, one of the first things I will say is, who here accepts the science of climate change? And usually you get a whole bunch of people will raise their hands. And then I will say, who doesn't accept climate change? And if someone does, I always say, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm really excited in many ways, and you're the most important person in the audience to me. Tell me what you'd like to get out of this evening. Now, the reason I go through all of that is, number one, it usually says to them, oh, I'm one or two people in this crowd of 50 people, which is helpful. But number two, it also, if they're there just to disrupt, they usually can't say that. They usually have to say something. Social pressure will make them say something like, well, I'm here to listen to the other side. and that actually can help create a kind of a dialogue with these folks. So just going to chuck out some kind of global warming-y, mythy kind of things. That you hear people say. One is, I don't believe in climate change. And I'd love for one of you guys to speak up and tell me what's wrong with that sentence. Anybody?
Well, I think climate change isn't like something you believe in or not. That's great. Actually, it's based on data. So
yeah, that's right. It's not a spiritual path. It's a scientific, it's science. So one of the big things that you can always push is the fact that 97% of peer-reviewed climatologists, who are the scientists who know the very most about the climate, are in lockstep agreement that man-made global warming is real. And it's important to push that because only 49% of Americans know that there is a scientific consensus on this. And even though the COVID crisis might make you think other words, Otherwise, at least in polling, Americans tend to trust scientists. So this is a really good thing to reinforce. Part of the reason they're confused is the media forever has had this thing about we have to present both sides of a story. So they will put up a climate change person and a climate change denier. And it then looks like it's a 50-50 controversy, right? When in fact, as we know, and John Oliver kind of did this brilliantly, he brought 97 scientists on stage and said, these are the guys who believe in the climate crisis. And then there were 3 people who didn't. But they don't do that on the news. They don't bring 97 to 3. So that's a problem. One of the things that I find very handy to have with my conservative friends is, this is a quote from the 4th National Climate Assessment released under former President Trump, which says human activities are the dominant cause for the global temperature rise, and there are no credible natural explanations. This is down to us, and this is from Mr. Trump's administration. It can be very handy to have quotes from different sides of the aisles when you're talking to folks. And of course, it makes some sense that people are confused because oil companies have spent millions and millions of dollars kind of disinforming people. So there's even some conversation that denialists shouldn't be called denialists. They should be called victims, that they're victims of this multi-million dollar campaign. Here's another one. Okay, I get your point about being about not believing. It's science. I'm a science skeptic. So the thing about that is, skepticism is a phenomenally important part of the scientific process. It's really woven into how science occurs. But there's a real difference between science, between skepticism, true skepticism, and denial. Real skepticism considers the evidence and then comes to a conclusion, whereas denial comes to a conclusion and then ignores any evidence that gets in the way of that, right? This one I kind of love, which is, we're at 414, 415 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And you'll often hear people say, well, wait, there's been that much CO2 in the atmosphere before. And the thing about that is they are 100% correct. That is absolutely 100% correct. So this is a chart showing CO2 emissions over the past 800,000 years. And this is temperature, which if you look is roughly analogous to what we see going on with CO2. So that's 800,000 years. This is where we were in 2019. And this is where we're going to be in another 40 years if we continue burning fossil fuels at the rate that we are currently going. So they are right when they say there's been this much CO2 in the atmosphere before, but not in 800,000 years. And the thing to know is anatomically modern human beings have only been around for about 200,000 years. In fact, if you want to have CO2 concentrations as high as they are right now, you actually have to go back about 3 million years to when the seas were 20 meters higher. There were palm trees growing on Antarctica then. My teacher, Dr. Michael Mann, explained to me that the amazing thing about that was when it got to that sort of temperature, it took place over thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It was so slow, coral reefs were able to migrate from the equator poleward to adapt and save. And coral doesn't migrate terribly quickly. So the big problem now is that what we're doing in a period of decades rather than over thousands and thousands of years, which really puts into question the survivability, the adaptability of an extraordinary amount of species that make up the incredible kind of pageant of biodiversity that we live with. So here's this thing, environmentalists are all left-wingers. So I want to show you a video from a woman named Debbie Dooley. Debbie started the Georgia Tea Party movement. And I think she actually has some extraordinary things to say.
This is my cell phone, okay? Does that look like that is the cell phone case of a liberal? My dad is a retired Baptist minister. He told me that in order to get people to hear your message, you have to get them in the church. That is a mistake that a lot of environmentalists make when talking to Republicans and conservatives about solar, about clean energy. They lead off with climate change. That is the wrong message. If you deliver the message of energy freedom, energy choice, competition, national security, innovation, all of a sudden you will have a receptive audience and they will listen to you. If you lead off with climate change, they're not going to pay a bit of attention to anything else you say. They've been brainwashed for decades into believing, that we're not damaging the environment. Unfortunately, a lot of these fossil fuel interests and giant monopolies have been telling activists for decades that we're not damaging the environment.
Everyone agrees that burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide and that such concentrations in the atmosphere are rising. But it's a long and dangerous leap to conclude that we should therefore cut fossil fuel use.
You have industries that have a lot of money in deep pockets, and they're willing to use that money to put out negative facts and bogus studies to convince us that renewables are bad.
Get the facts about these out-of-state solar companies at azsolarfacts.com.
And by God, they're not going to get away with it. You have to understand one thing. The Republican Party has always been, in the past, a party of conservation. Richard Nixon, Republican president, actually created the EPA to make sure we had clean air and clean water.
Each of us all across this great land has a stake in maintaining and improving environmental quality.
Ronald Reagan is not actually known as an environmental president, but he was a conservationist. He actually believed man was damaging the environment, and he advocated very strongly for and signed the Montreal Protocol that banned fluorocarbons. If Ronald Reagan were alive today and he wanted to ban aerosols, fluorocarbons, because he saw scientific evidence that they were damaging the environment, some of these same groups that are attacking renewables would be attacking the conservative icon, Ronald Reagan. One of the reasons I'm fighting very hard to bring conservatives on board and to educate conservatives to advance renewables, failure is not an option. This earth is not a Republican earth. It's not a Democrat earth. This earth belongs to all of us. If you think fossil fuel is not damaging the environment, pull your car in a garage, start up your engine, and inhale the exhaust fumes for a few minutes and see what happens.
So one of the big things with what she was just talking about, and they're sort of, well, let me just mention this first too. And by the way, I'm a Democrat, so for whatever use that is. I don't know what party anybody is, it doesn't matter. Republicans, the majority of Republicans now say that they support policies to mitigate climate change. Also, young Republicans age 30 and under powerfully believe the climate crisis is real. And this is a real problem for the Republican Party. They have to figure out how to deal with older Republicans don't poll as well on it. So there's a kind of schism there. One of the most important things to do in these conversations is to listen. You know, I believe if you're trying to convince somebody of something, you have to be willing to listen and be proven wrong by them. I think there's a way people feel that and they know it's true. The other thing that's really true, and that Debbie Dooley was just speaking to, is that if you're a person that cares about polar bears, but you're talking to a CEO of a company who only cares about economics, you can't talk about polar bears. You've got to find out what it is that you have in common, and that's got to be where you go. Why did I put this slide in? I can't remember. Oh, except to say every single audience that I talk to, there's a different approach. There's a different tack to it. We were talking the other day, I gave a climate change talk to the Ulster County, the executive. And he was listening and bored. And I had this thought and I said, you know, you have a problem. The CLCPA mandates 70% of our electricity comes from renewable sources by 2030, 100% by 2040. You also are in a county where one of the biggest concerns people have is that the young people are leaving the county because there's no work. You don't have a trained workforce that can build the solar that we need, that can install the solar, that can do the home energy retrofits, that can do that work. He saw, and it's because I was thinking about him suddenly and not just my own thing, suddenly I was relating to what was interesting to him. And within a week, they had built this thing called the Green Careers Academy that offers scholarships to people to learn how to get into these trades. One quick thing is people are often scared of not knowing the answer. The thing that I always feel is if you don't know the answer, you say it immediately. You say, that's such a good question. I don't know the answer. Can I take your phone number and then I'll get back to you? And what you're doing is establishing a relationship. You know, often these talks don't work the first time. Sometimes you have to chip away at things. And I believe in politics, a no is just a yes that needs work. So, and you're also, by saying I don't know, you're establishing credibility for yourself. I'll just quickly mention a couple of great resources around climate change and things that could be useful. Skepticalscience.com is a fabulous website that deals with climate change myths. There's a free course through the University of Queensland online called The Psychology of Denial. And these are some fabulous books. The one on top, Dr. Michael E. Mann's new book, The New Climate War, that have great stuff on kind of denial. And I'm trying to stop screen share. Oh, I didn't do it. Let's see. Am I still screen sharing?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah,
no? Oh, good. Perfect. So that's that.